Hi, folks. Welcome to Bernie Blackout News, presenting Earth Matters, a local activist group who's going to talk to us today about environmental issues and climate change. And my name is Theo Talcott from Manchester, Vermont, and I have some noble guests to introduce themselves.
My name is Letitia Scordino, and I'm a newcomer to Vermont. I live in Dorset.
Hello, I'm Carl Buchholz, and I live in Manchester, Vermont.
And I'm Marianne Carlson, and I live in Arlington, Vermont.
And we've been working on a resolution on climate change for the town meetings in the area. And there's 30 towns in Vermont that have got town meeting resolutions going on, led by 350 Vermont. So we're here to talk about that issue today. And but first, Letitia, tell us a little bit about Earth Matters.
Okay, Earth Matters was formed last year, February, and it came as a deep concern that we all shared about what's happening to our planet. I, for one, was extremely worried about the EPA being demolished and the water not being clean and the air, and we were terrified. I was terrified. And we formed the group in February, and we started rather small. We had our first meeting at a local farmers market where we distributed seeds and spoke a bit to the people about our belief. And then we progressed to becoming a node of 350 Vermont. And that's when it really started moving, and we became involved in presenting the resolution.
I'm going to read specifically what it says that we are asking the town to do. So, whereas extreme and erratic temperatures, increasingly severe storms, flooding, a rise in tick-borne diseases, and threats to farmers and maple sugar makers clearly demonstrate that climate change is one of the most urgent problems facing our state, the nation, and the world. And whereas the state of Vermont has a goal in the Comprehensive Energy Plan to achieve 90% of its energy from renewable sources by the year 2050, yet is making insufficient progress towards achieving that goal. Now, therefore, be it resolved, 1, that the town urges the state of Vermont to A, halt any new or expanded fossil fuel infrastructure, including but not limited to energy pipelines. B, firmly commit to at least 90% renewable energy for all people in Vermont with firm interim deadlines. And C, ensure that the transition to renewable energy is fair and equitable for all residents, with no harm to low-income people, people of color, or rural communities. And 2, that the town will do our part to meet these demands by committing to efforts such as A, protecting town lands from fossil fuel infrastructure, denying easements or agreements for any pipelines crossing town lands. B, enlisting state support in weatherizing town buildings and schools and installing alternative energy, such as rooftop solar, to town structures. And C, other initiatives to improve the quality of life while helping to reduce overall use of energy.
All right.
So these resolutions, at least in Manchester, we gathered over 200 signatures. So this will be on the town warning, and one of the purposes of this show is to inform people about the resolution, and hopefully you will show up at town meeting and vote to pass it.
Right.
In Arlington, we did not do the petition, but we are going to present this resolution at our town meeting on Monday night before we vote on Tuesday. And we have a young group of environmentalists in the high school, and they're going to be there to talk a little bit about their concerns and also to present the resolution. And then I'm hoping we'll have a very lively discussion, just as we're going to have here, about why we think this resolution is so important, and hoping that the town will pass it at the town meeting, and then we will pass it on up to the state.
That's great. So it's really wonderful that you're going to be taking this conversation to Arlington and to Manchester. This is such an important topic, and the reason that 350 Vermont took this tactic on of doing the town meeting resolutions is we want to have this conversation with our communities about the fact that we're living in climate change right now. When it rains in Manchester now, the rivers that run through our streets are incredible. We're really not prepared for the weather we're having currently. And that's partially because we built our town based on, before we had so much rain. And it just rains more now. Some of the climate science shows that when it rains now, it rains more at one time. So we have less rain, but when it comes, it's on. So how do we get our towns ready? And I'm looking forward to the conversations, and I encourage everyone to come to town meeting because this is our year to be there.
Now, in Dorset, it's done a little differently than in Manchester and in Arlington. There will be a town hall meeting on the 5th of March, and we will talk about the resolution. The following day, there will be a vote. It'll be an Australian vote. And we're hoping to make clear to people that we are merely advising. We're advising people. There's nothing mandatory that anyone has to follow. We just want to bring awareness to the community that we feel our government at the moment is, although there are many proposals in place, we feel that it's not moving as quickly as it should be moving. Mm-hmm. And that we will not achieve this goal of 90% by 2050.
Well, and that I think that bears out. The governor had a commission, the Vermont Climate Action Commission. 21 people from all over the state were on that commission. And they put forth a proposal. He asked it be done at least by July, but it was done just recently. And then he made a decision that quite a few of the things in the proposal he wasn't even going to consider. One of them is a thing called the Essex Plan, and I want to make sure if anybody wants to read it, it's a wonderful plan. Economy Strengthening Strategic Energy Exchange. And that was in there in terms of really looking at how our economy can work with our present fossil fuel, look at how we can get our renewables in and move ahead, and that it will be economically much more viable for all of us. It will take into consideration low-income people, which is one of the things that he talked about, so that it will make sure it will take into consideration people. Our electric bills will go down, all of that. But our governor at this point is not really willing to do that because he wants to see it done on a federal level. Well, it's not going to be done on a federal level because at this present federal government, they're not really pushing to look at how to remedy climate change. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can jumpstart it here in Vermont. We've done a lot of other things that we've jumpstarted, and it's made a big ripple in the rest of the United States, so I think Vermont can do it.
Right.
I think so too. I mean, it may turn out we just need different leadership at some point. The ideas are on the table now. The Essex Plan is a great plan. There's a lot of things waiting for us. Governor Phil Scott, I call him sometimes Phil Scott Walker, because he has all these national ideas that are not, I think, suited for Vermont's politics. And this I call this commission the Climate Warren Commission, because it's sort of just kind of pushing the ball down the road and not really trying to get. I'm really down on the fact that they put so much effort in listening to Vermonters and then didn't do anything that the Vermonters said to them. I think it's just, climate change is too serious for us to be oh, we'll solve it in 2 years. So that's sort of our point to the people is we want to take these issues back to our town because we're not getting the leadership we need from the governor.
There's a very important committee that the legislature does have. It's the Legislative Committee on Climate Action. And so Mitzi Johnson, who is the House Speaker, is moving ahead to do that. I mean, she is pushing for it. And There is also a Greenhouse Commission on the rise and falling of the state statutory goals. So we've risen with these state statutories, and now we're not pushing forward with them. And so there's a commission to look at that. And then the health committees are looking at what climate change is actually doing or not doing if we don't do something about it in terms of carbon emissions on asthma, on all sorts of diseases that are happening. And so I think our legislators, who are our representatives, are working. So I think that our doing these resolutions with 30 towns across the state will really help them know that there is a groundswell of people who really want this to happen. And that barring whatever our governor might think about it, at least people from the grassroots are going to be working on it.
Right. I can imagine that a lot of people will ask the question, what good will it do if a little state like Vermont, really goes to the forefront of the climate issue and passes, significant legislation to cut our carbon footprint? And my answer would be that we can be a model for other states. And you can look at Vermont and say, wow, you're not only a rural state, but you have a cold climate, people have to heat their homes, they have to drive vast distances to go to hospitals and go to work. So if we can do it, then other states can look at us and go, oh, okay, if you can do it, then we can do it. And it really is possible. I mean, the Essex Plan is one idea. There's a group, I remember it's CEAT, Climate Economy Action Team. They have a great proposal. They want to have a bond, $100 million bond to weatherize 10,000 homes. And the amazing thing about this is that it sounds like a huge amount of money, but the cost of the bond each year will be less than the money that's currently being appropriated and spent for heating oil and gas subsidies. So people are struggling to keep their houses warm. They're getting assistance. I can't remember the exact numbers. I think it's like $4.5 million a year. If you pass this $100 million bond, it's only going to be like $3 million a year to pay it off, but 10,000 homes will then be weatherized. And it's been very clear that in terms of, bang for the buck, that weatherization is the cheapest way that we can reduce our carbon footprint.
Yeah. So what might be the reason people are so resistant? And there are people in the state of Vermont who are very resistant to the change to fossil fuel fast. What might be some reasons for it? I know there are some individuals who object to the windmills, that it's harmful to our water source, and also not beautiful to look at. But ultimately, the change is inevitable. It has to happen.
Right.
The transition probably is the difficult part. That's probably no one is forcing anyone to buy an electric car, but unless we get some sort of financial assistance from the government, even the transition is impossible. How can people do it?
So can I answer one of them?
Yes.
When I lived in Arlington, 1976, there was a windmill on Equinox. And every time I drove from Arlington to Manchester, I'd look up on the mountain, and if I saw the blades turning, I'd go, yes, it's great. It's, to me, it was beautiful. And I know to other people, they look and they may see windmills as ugly. So, the phrase that pops into my mind is the difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. I know I travel down the country and see windmills in Nebraska and Colorado and Texas and Iowa, like really extensive, miles of them. And my wife and I cheer. We go, yay, look at that, it's beautiful. So it is a question of getting used to it. And the other point about change is if we do nothing, if we just continue as things are. We read in the resolution about maple sugar makers. Our maple trees are stressed, and we could really lose them. I didn't know this, but blueberry bushes and maple trees need at least 40 days, 40 days per year of, no, I'm sorry, 100 days a year of temperatures below 40 degrees. 100 days a year. So if our climate shifts, we're going to lose the maple trees. So if you're worried about Vermont's landscape changing, you better do something to protect the maple trees, because that's a part of our heritage. I mean, maple, syrup, we have the foliage, we have tourists coming in. So we have a lot at stake.
To the question of why people don't want to deal with climate change, there's a Yale Center for Climate Communication, and they've done a lot of work about how people now it's kind of their identity to be like pro this, anti that. So like there's a whole kind of sort of like like progressives believe in climate change and conservatives don't. And if you want to be in the club of the conservatives, it's sort of what they're asking of you now, is to be like anti-climate change and against gay rights and against this and against that. And so I think how do we address that is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the problems with getting the vast majority, 70% of people do believe it's happening, but there are a significant number of people who even question that climate change is real. And one of the problems why they do that is there are people who are paid hired guns who will plant the seed of doubt. These are the same people they call merchants of doubt. And there was a movie that came to Manchester.
Yes, I saw it.
There's a book written by these
Yeah.
two people. And these folks are amazingly good at what they do. They worked for the chemical industry that made fire retardant clothes, turned out to
right.
be a
Yeah.
total sham. They worked for the tobacco industry, planting doubt. Oh, no, it doesn't cause cancer. And now the oil industry and the coal industry has hired them to do the same thing. And I saw that movie and I could not believe it. There was a scientific brochure from real climate scientists, and then there was one put out by a group, fueled by money from fossil fuel industry, and it looked identical. Same charts, same bar graphs. I'm like, really?
They're amazing.
It's understandable that intelligent people, when confronted with this information, can have some doubt. But I just say, look at what's going on around us. We were talking a little bit about here in Vermont, the farmers have noticed that the climate is changing so significantly that spring has now become colder and wetter, and the fall has become drier and warmer. And so the whole planting of crops has shifted. We're now in zone 5 for planting. If you have shrubs and vegetables. We used to be, a whole different climate zone.
Right.
So things have definitely shifted.
And that's why it's so important to come to GNAT and make our own media, because this is probably the first conversation you've heard about climate change in a long time. And that's because we're not being paid or unpaid or by the fossil fuel companies to do this. So just something to keep in mind. It's a propaganda age we live in. And
Right.
on the other hand, though, an age of truth is brewing underneath the surface. There is a real effort to defend the sacred and try and stick with what is really true.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful in some regards that a lot of this nonsense will change out.
You know what convinced me years ago that climate change was real? This blew my mind. There was an article in the paper about an international symposium of insurance companies. We're talking Lloyd's of London and Prudential and John Hancock. All the big insurance companies in the world got together. And the article said these insurance companies concluded that global warming and climate change was real and that they had to prepare for it. And so when I saw that, I'm like, wait a minute, these people are apolitical. They don't have a political axe to grind. They're not Republicans, Democrats. They may vote that way, but all they care about is actuarial tables and making money and making sure that their rates are high enough to cover what they have to pay out.
Right.
So when this group, which is totally objective, came out and said, yep, climate change is real, global warming is real, we have to prepare for it, I'm like, wow, they say that.
And the U.S. Navy is now adjusting all its charts about like raising the docks because they know that the sea levels are rising. So, I mean, if the U.S. military is agreeing with the insurers, then it's probably happening.
Right.
Right, and it's been around a long time. I had a very good friend who gave a whole little group of us a symposium on climate change because he worked for the Department of Energy. And they have known for 2 decades that the ocean is warming. And so the ocean 12 years ago had warmed over the previous like 40 years 1 degree. In the last 12 years, it's warmed almost another degree. So we've got to look at the fact that this is just accelerating. And with that warm water comes some of the things that you were talking about in terms of rain. How much rain we get, you know,
Right.
the rain that comes across from these hurricanes hits the Green Mountains, hits our streams, comes down, does its, you know, doesn't have anywhere to go, and we have problems. We have flooding. We have all of that kind of thing. And so it's not like it's a secret. It's been around for a long time, but I don't think we have very much time left. I think this is to your point about the earth and thinking about the earth and thinking about we sentient beings living on the earth. We need clean air. We need clean water. We need places for habitat. We need, and we know that most of these storms are hitting the least able people to take care of them.
Right.
We're looking at they look at Puerto Rico, you know, I mean, demolished the country was.
Right.
So we all have a responsibility to move this along much faster. And we have the capabilities. We know that. We know about solar. Even if you are against wind in certain places, there's some places in the state where we can use wind energy, and it's not going to bother anybody. It might bother the aesthetics, but it's not going to bother people with sound or any of that kind of thing. Right. And certainly we are still doing the hydro. So we've got that. I mean, I just am becoming a member of a community solar farm where I'm going to get certain kinds of rebates on my electric utility bill because I have bought into this solar farm. And so, you know, solar farm, we don't have cow farms here anymore. Vermont used to have 1,500 small farms here in Bennington County. We now maybe have 7.
Wow.
So you have to think about, all right, let's do solar farms.
Well, I'm all for solar farms. I think the government should be picking winners. I think Obama's big mistake was the all of the above energy strategy, which allowed natural gas pipelines to be built all over the country, and including in Vermont. So the state should be investing in a solar utility and should be helping us build the future we need, not just waiting.
It does work even in Vermont, even with the cloudiness and the snow covering the panels sometimes. You can still get a year's worth of energy. Yeah.
The naysayers who are in denial of climate change, I believe, have not experienced the calamity firsthand. There are people who have to actually see it and feel it before they believe.
I had the privilege to be at Standing Rock, and the Native Americans put a great emphasis on rebuilding our relationship with Mother Earth, that we can do this work in relationship with Mother Earth, and we want to not be shy about thinking about that, using those words and creating that sort of inner relationship that you're talking about, because that's real. Mother Earth is real. It's a living being, and we have every right to think that way and to defend the sacred. Things that we love, we can defend.
What we're talking about is climate change that is going to make the world a place that's unfit for human civilization. That's the problem. We have, you know, built cities like Miami and New York that are really close to sea level. And if we get a 10-foot rise in sea level, we're talking New York City is toast.
We know if we start here, you know, the stone in the pond, the ripple goes out. So what we can do here is take care of ourselves, our neighbors, our communities, our state, and hope that the ripple goes out. And it's not that we're isolated in states or anything like that, but because there's other states that are also looking at very important resolutions in terms of climate change. And we certainly in this state, I mean, the 90% renewables by 2050, we started that quite a few years ago. It's not a new idea. We just know we've got to accelerate it now.
On a hopeful note, I read an article, it was in yesterday's Times. There's a company called Xcel, X-C-E-L. They supply electricity to 8 states in the Midwest, from Texas up to Michigan. They have now commissioned new solar panels and wind turbines to produce their electricity that they sell. And they are stopping getting electricity from 2 coal plants, not because they're environmentalists, but because it's cheaper for them to bring on new solar and wind
That's
than
great.
to keep on doing coal.
1 in 16 workers here in the state of Vermont is involved in the renewable energy field.
Wow.
So it's an economic pusher. And I wish the fossil fuel folks would just get on board with renewables, just as we've
They'd make
got,
money.
you know, we have the batteries and Tesla and all of these wonderful automobiles that are soon to be without having to need fossil fuels. We're going to move ahead, and we can do that right here in Vermont.
Right on.
Right, right. So, you know, the resolution talks about the town to do other initiatives that will lower our use of carbon. One of the things could be having hybrid or electric town vehicles. Even Green Mountain Power, when they were CVPS, they started to roll out their trucks that had hybrid engines. So when, you know, they were up in the air working on the lines, the engine was shut off. And they were working on battery. And only when they needed to recharge the battery, the engine would start. So the technology exists. You can have electric or hybrid school buses, you know, certainly vehicles.
So it has to be a financial incentive for people to make the change, not that one can all of a sudden change, transform.
Right.
Love of the planet, it has to be more where it hits their wallet.
Start local.
Right.
Vote for the resolution.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Go to town meeting. Well, it's been an interesting discussion, and clearly we have a lot to say. We'll have to make this a regular gig. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Theo.